Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to Kadampa Center. My name is Chuki, if there's anybody here who doesn't know me. We'll be starting in just a moment. Venerable George will be coming in. And just like to let folks know to please turn off anything that's going to make noise. And when Venerable George comes in, we'll all stand and some of us will do prostrations. That's the bowing we do. Don't feel at all like you need to do that. No one's going to be paying attention to who's doing it and who isn't, but I just like to let people know that's what's going on. If anybody has brought their child here for the first time, we do have a form we ask you to fill out just so we know if they've got any food allergies, things like that. So if you're in that situation, just let me know. Otherwise, we'll get going here in just a minute.
Please sit down, comfortable.
So if you turn to the first beige sheet in the white prayer book, and those are either behind your seat if you're in a chair, in front of you if you're here on the cushions, or at the end if you're at the pews. We'll start with the Shakyamuni Buddha's mantra. We'll do that 3 times, and then we'll do the 4 measurables in both English and then Tibetan. Taya ta om mune mune maha munae soha. Taya ta om mune mune maha munae soha. Taya ta om mune mune maha munae soha. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Sem Chen Tam Che De Wa Dong De Wei Gyu Dam Den Par Gyur Chi Dung Ya Dong Dum Nya Gi Gyu Don Drel War Gyur Chi Dung Ya Me Pe De Wa Dong Mi Drel War Gyur Chi Yering Cha Dong Ni Don Drel Wei Tan Yom Lane Par Gyur Chi. And then if you turn the page on the front side of the pink sheet, we'll do those two mantras at the bottom. We'll do the Chenrezig's mantra 8 times and Green Tar's mantra 7. Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 Om Tare Tu Re So Ha. 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 All right, and the children are free to go to their classes now.
Hello, there we go. I wasn't sure why he was upset. He wanted to stay apparently. Good morning. How are you? How many people here new this morning that hadn't been here before? Oh, a couple of people. Good. So as they, as I joke a little bit, I say sometimes, as it says in church, let us pray. So I say, let us meditate. So anyone who's never meditated before? Okay, so you have a little idea what it's meant. So let's just begin by calming our mind, like a general cleaning of the mind so that we can set a good motivation by watching the respiration. If you become very skilled in this over time, simply watching 7 respirations, you can leave your mind in a equanimous state, quiet of thoughts. Might take us a little bit longer. So You can either count the breaths mentally or not. Put all your attention on the breath, but know that when you're breathing in, say to yourself, I'm breathing in, be conscious of that, just the endpoints where the attention can flutter because you're not breathing out yet. Watch that exact point where it's changing down, out, in, and so forth. And let go of all other thoughts. Relax your body, relax your mind in the sense of being here now. Don't worry about the future. Let go of the bag of future problems and the bag of past problems and interests. Just watch your breathing. You might have started off with good concentration and then got distracted, or vice versa. You might have been distracted and merged into better concentration. But if any distractions arise, not trying to push them out of the mind, but ignore them in the sense of putting more attention onto the principal object of your attention here, the breathing. Let those other thoughts become unattended to. And with the mind slightly pacified, slightly calmed, try to set a motivation for this morning, today, this week, this year, this life. Do to what I'm about to do, listen to the teachings, contemplate them, reflect on them, meditating on them. And whatever I do in my life, in the rest of this life and future lives, may it be for the main purpose for my spiritual development so that I can find real, authentic, satisfying happiness, contentment of the enlightened state. And from that development of my mind, day by day, year by year, may I become better able to benefit sentient beings until when I become perfected, I can benefit all sentient beings. That's my goal, sort of long-term destination, enlightenment, whatever problems along the way or little joys along the way, no big deal. That's where I'm going. And then relax, bring your attention back to the present. So, full house. If there's someone who feels a little cramped back there, there's a couple of empty seats in the front. Do you feel like you want to move around? How are you today? Okay, good. The last 3 weeks, I've been talking successively about the first three of the four immeasurable thoughts. Now, some of you don't know probably what the four. How many don't know what the four immeasurables are? Okay, good. That's good. Are there some old students in there? No, I'm just teasing. I've been getting on the case of the older students that they don't memorize these simple categories. So the four immeasurables are what we recited at the beginning in English and then we chanted in Tibetan. How wonderful it would be if all living beings had happiness and the cause of happiness. Immeasurable love, that's called. Immeasurable compassion is thinking how wonderful it would be if all living beings were free of suffering and the causes of suffering. Immeasurable in the sense of numberless sentient beings, immeasurable sentient beings, and all of the various kinds of suffering. May they be free from everything. Immeasurable joy, we talked about last week, how wonderful it would be if sentient beings were never separated from happiness that is without sorrow. We talked about rejoicing last time. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about immeasurable equanimity. How wonderful it would be if all living beings abided in a state of equanimity that was free of being close to some, like say for instance out of attachment or affection, and distant from others due to some resentment or anger or something like that. Do you know what, does that word make sense to you, equanimity? Does that sound like a suitable spiritual quality, or should spiritual Buddhists, aspirants be partial? Equanimity. So in order to have that wish for living beings to feel that, you know, how wonderful it would be if everyone abided in equanimity, in order to feel positive about that, we have to take some effort to try to generate equanimity in our own mind. Generally, we have certain partialities. People that are pleasing to us, praise us, our so-called friends, we may be more partial to. If they need a favor, we're willing to help them out. Someone who's a stranger and they ask for some favor, depends on our mood. We might begrudge them some help. But someone's an enemy, are you as easily, someone that you, in your own mind, you categorize as an enemy and they have some problem, are you as easily able to help them out? Maybe not. Maybe. Depends on your mind. Equanimity is a state of mind that recognizes that living beings may at any one time be recognized by us as within these three camps of friends, enemies, or strangers. But those categories or camps are not definite. That's the main thing. They're not definite. They change. There's no one who's eternally a friend. Even like the love stories or something like that, eternal soulmate or something like that. Unlikely from life to life. Even if you were fortunate enough to remain friends with someone all this life, there's always ups and downs within friendships, aren't there? Still, in future lifetimes, when you encounter that person again in some other realm, you may be in different life forms. You may be a human, they may be a flea, you may be a cockroach, they may be a dog. You won't recognize one another, or you'll be antagonists. There's nothing definite about the categories of friend, enemy, and stranger. And so to try to recognize that and use it, first of all, the first common meditation on equanimity, that when I say common, that means it's common between the Theravada system of Buddhism, the lesser vehicle, let's say, and the Mahayana, is to recognize that these three categories of friends, enemies, and strangers are not definite, and to try to equalize your feelings toward them so that when you see someone, even if you see them presently as a friend, to recognize that they could be an enemy later. They have been enemy in past lives. When you see the enemy, to recognize that they're not always an enemy. Even in a short time, they could become a friend. And the stranger, as soon as you meet them, your feelings are going to, depending on, quote, first impressions or how profound or superficial your analysis of them is, you may be attracted to them and feel they're a friend and want to help them or put them in the category of enemy. Do you remember in the sandbox? Do you remember back in the kindergarten? None of you are too old to remember that, I think. Do you girls remember? Lily and, no, you don't remember the sandbox? Or maybe you don't have sand here. Oh, Lily does. You deprived your daughter of sand, I think. You didn't have sand. What I mean by this sandbox is playing as kids when you were little and someone took your rubber ducky or something and you got red in the face and you were angry and they were your enemy. Has it ever happened that someone that you remember at one point being your enemy later became your friend? Remember? That's a very good example in your mind to think of situations like that. When we do analytical meditation, these are the things that make our analytical meditation come to life, when we can think of explicit examples in our life of situations. Someone who was an enemy at one time, or at least a stranger, maybe an enemy, and later became so dear to us that to be separated from them was painful and sad. Or vice versa, someone who was so close and dear to us that we married or we vowed eternal love to, or companionship, blood brothers forever, sisters forever. Was it BFF? That's not blood, is it? That's best, right? Not blood friends forever. Best friends forever. Is it best friends forever? Is that what the two F's are? Yeah. And later they became enemies? Is it possible? Maybe it's happened to us. Sometimes if we've had a rupture of a relationship and divorce or whatever, someone that was so close later became enemy. So these categories are not, as our mind ordinarily assumes without analysis, grasps that these categories are somehow inviolate, that they are definite. that someone is a friend that can always be relied on and so forth. By having that kind of state of mind, you're going to not be able to help other living beings. You're not going to be able to really generate authentic love and compassion for them. I'll give you an example. If you try to develop compassion, wishing others to be free of suffering, or develop love, wishing them to be happy, for friends, it might be quite easy, right? Your loved ones, your children, panda bears, porpoises, attractive people. You can feel, oh yes, it would be nice they were happy and they were free of suffering. But for enemies or cockroaches, or what do we find repugnant? Spiders, ISIS, terrorists. What? Mouse. Just one. I would have thought you said mice. It's just one mouse that she's not happy with. I'm not sure who said that. What was it? Snakes. There's definitely some resistance to. Equanimity does not mean that you are unaware of the dangers of enemies. What it means is that you have imbued in your consciousness a certain kind of wisdom that recognizes these categories are not definite, eternal, that things can change. There's a story from the Lam Rim teachings. I may have mentioned it in one of the other talks. It comes from the Buddha scriptures, not just from the Lam Rim. One of the disciples of the Buddha, I think it was Mahamoggallana, who was considered to be foremost in psychic powers. Have you heard that? Different of the Buddha's disciples were, he said, you are foremost, Shariputra, you are foremost in wisdom of all my disciples, or Mahakashyapa, you're foremost in ascetic behavior, or something. Mahamoggallana was foremost in psychic powers of the Buddhist disciples, able to read minds, see the future and things. So he was out on alms round one day with his bowl, and he went by a house and he looked in the window. I don't think he was peeping at Tom. He was he was inquiring, and he saw within the kitchen of this house a newlywed couple. The husband, they had a child already, so it was not completely newlywed. They had a baby. The husband was holding the baby on his lap, laughing and holding it. The wife was cooking a fish on the stove and kicking away the dog that was lapping at her heels. So he looked with his psychic powers and to see how these people were related in the past. And he saw that in the past, the father and the child had been competitors for the lady's hand, and that the present husband of the wife had killed the competitor in some kind of combat to get her hand. And now that child had been born out of attachment for the lady. The wife, he had been born as the child, and now was loved by the father before he'd killed. The fish in the pan had been the wife's father, who had bequeathed her and the husband the land, and out of attachment had been born as a fish in the pond up back, out of his attachment to the territory. Now she's cooking it. And the dog had been the wife's mother, who out of attachment had been born also as an animal, but as a dog, not recognizing the fish as her former husband, who was lapping at the feet, wanting to eat the fish that was in the frying pan. So Mahamoggallana said, how strange is samsara, embracing the enemy, eating the father, beating the mother, everything changes. So that's a good example, I think. These categories are not definite; they can change, and that's the main the main thing to concentrate on in the common sense of equanimity. In order to feel immeasurable equanimity, to have some flavor for the words, how wonderful it would be if all living beings were in a state of equanimity, free of closeness to some and distance from others. In other words, how wonderful it would be if all living beings were impartial in a state of equanimity. I pointed out in the first class, impartial, the word in Tibetan, and I think in Sanskrit is a positive word like equanimity, whereas impartial means not partial. It's a negative word. So it's, in some ways, they do have the same meaning, but they're linguistically a little bit different. In order to feel the wonder and happiness and that everyone be like that, you have to experience that state of equanimity yourself to know what that's like and the benefits of it. There is a meditation on equanimity that we're going to do. We're going to talk about a little bit. The common equanimity, that when I say common to the Hinayana and the Mahayana, is to recognize that all living beings are equal in having been friend, enemy, and stranger, and are equal in their potential in the future to be friend, enemy, and stranger. There's no one who is always in one camp. When I say common to the Hinayana and Mahayana, there's an exclusive equanimity meditation for the Mahayana, the Bodhisattva path. Has anyone ever received teaching on that ever? The Mahayana equanimity meditation? Well, you heard last lecture, so you know, unless you forgot. Right? So the Mahayana equanimity is to think that not only are living beings equal in being friend, enemy, and stranger in the past, although it doesn't mean that right now all friends are enemies and all enemies are friends. It doesn't mean that. It just means even though they may sit in these camps or on these chairs, the enemy chair or the friend chair, that's not definite. Like in kindergarten, besides Sam, I talk a lot about kindergarten. It must have been an important time for me. Besides the sandbox, when you play, did you remember musical chairs? That must be popular in the South here too. Did you play musical chairs? Yeah. Does anyone not know what musical chairs is? Really? So the kids would sit down in a chair. There would be one that was standing, and then Mrs. Kinney or whoever your teacher would play the piano, the music would start, and they'd run around the chairs, and when the music stopped, you'd sit down, and then different person might not be in one of the chairs. Or else, if there's same number of people as chairs, you'd be in different chairs. So who was in the friend chair when the music stops again might be in the stranger chair or the enemy chair. Is that okay? Get the idea. So besides that kind of common equanimity, there's an exclusive Mahayana equanimity meditation that thinks all living beings are equal in being potential recipients of my love and compassion. It's not as though there are some individuals who are suitable to help and there are others that are not suitable to help. We talked in the earlier, what do you call it on Sunday? Sermon? Talk? Teaching. Good. Is anyone here, I know there's a couple of physicians, but anyone else a physician besides Don Brown and Robbie? A couple of physicians. So if someone, according to whatever oaths you take or regulations you have, can you, in theory, ethically be partial towards, partial toward, what's the word? Discriminate against those that you don't like? That would be unprofessional, right? And maybe that's the official legal word, but it would also, in a sense, be unethical. And yeah, the ethics of a physician, a doctor, is such like that. Right. So I think in the medical profession and helping professions, the profession becomes much more part of your ethos and your personality. Some professions, maybe not, so, welding or something, you may not be that invested in the wells or something like that. Maybe some people, ditch digger or whatever. So for instance, if there are people who are asking for your help, if you're in the food kitchen, doling out the food to those in need, and some that are attractive to you, you give bigger dump, and those that you don't like it, or you spit in it or something like that. Hannah, were you shocked? You wouldn't do that, right? I was asking Hannah. No, you wouldn't. Yeah, you look shocked when I said. You're like, who would do that? That's the joke you see on TV sometime. I don't know if it ever happens. Maybe. There was a meditation course in Manjushri Institute many years ago when I was there, back in the 70s, I think, late 70s, that was put on by a psychologist at British College who was a student at the Institute. And he called it Meditation for the Helping Professions. And the main meditation that he found successful in this course, first of all, it was the biggest subscribed course that had ever been put on at the Institute. Many people came, teachers, nurses, psychologists, therapists of various kinds, what other kinds of we call helping professions, social workers, massage workers, whatever. And he found that the meditation that he only introduced 2 or 3 meditations. The one that he found that was best received was the equanimity meditation, because of a particular phenomena that at least in the psychological community, but maybe also in the other professions, they use a particular word to indicate a certain kind of deficiency when you're trying to practice, called transference. Have you heard of that? As a physician, what does transference mean? Or as a psychologist, maybe there's a psychologist also in here that would want to speak what it means in psychology. No. We want to have it so, because it's streaming and people can't hear the question otherwise, unless it's on the. Now he's tongue-tied.
I mean, I confuse the term. I confuse the terms, but.
You don't want to be in the record, in other words, okay.
But yeah,
in case you make a mistake. That's okay. That's okay.
But I have certain. I look at it as views I look that I kind of project. I mean, it's not, I confuse it with projection.
Right. Well, I think it is related. Anyone who's a psychologist here? Do you use the word transference in the psychological world? What does it mean there?
Transference are the feelings that are generated by the patient towards the helper, and those feelings originate in that person's experiences, and then they are projected onto the helper.
Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not using the right term. I thought there was a kind of phenomena where you would transfer. There would be a certain amount of say, if you had empathy for a client or patient, you might tend to help them more. And for a client that you felt a certain resistance, not empathy for, some repugnance toward, you might short shrift them. Is that the right term?
That would be my countertransference.
Oh, countertransference. Okay, great.
Yes.
Thanks. So I was using the wrong term. So it's actually countertransference. Yes. So that apparently, at least in some of the helping professions, teachers also, helping students and so forth, if you felt some attraction, and of course there's the danger that you may end up in a relationship with them. We hear about scandals all the time, or giving special grades to someone, or maybe penalizing someone with grades or with whatever advice or service that you give because you don't feel close to them. So the therapists at that meditation course recognized that as a potential problem, maybe a major problem in certain cases, that you would always have a certain bias, partiality, and that it prevented you from being a authentic, high functioning therapist. Does that make sense to you? So the meditation on equanimity is to begin to recognize the common meditation, just to recognize that there's no one who is always a friend, always an enemy, that these categories are changing. But further, the Mahayana equanimity is that they are potentially equal recipients of your love and compassion. It does not mean that you have to bend over and let the enemy take advantage of you. You can still be vigilant, right? Remember when we talked about compassion 2 weeks ago, I mentioned how even if you were involved in watching prisoners or interrogating prisoners, that you're told, like the Israelis and some of the soldiers told that when they interrogate Palestinians, they can't have any sympathy or empathy for them, any compassion, because the enemy soldiers might take advantage of them. I think that state of mind really is one of the, one of the that state of mind that allows a partial mind like that is one of the causes of cruelty and torture, that exacerbates that, tendency to engage in that. And I had mentioned how some Israeli soldiers that I met once were resistant to thinking about compassion because they'd been taught you couldn't have compassion for the Palestinians. Do you remember? Maybe some of you were mentioned when I talked about that. But how I mentioned that it doesn't preclude you being vigilant. You're still vigilant. Let's say you're with someone who maybe even on the street has got a knife and so forth. It doesn't mean like, oh yeah, slice me up. It doesn't having love and impartiality doesn't mean like that. You're still vigilant. You don't want the other person to create harm or yourself to be harmed and so forth. But you still recognize that this is an individual who is going to be experiencing the results of their aggression in the future, let's say, if in the case of someone who's harming you. Defocusing on your own worry about yourself and feeling some compassion for them. Having the mind like that can diffuse a situation. It comes to mind, have you heard of the Saint Francis of Assisi? What was his, when I think of animals, anyone know, what was his special, you're nodding, what was his special feature? Yeah. He had the ability.
He had the ability to feel great compassion toward animals and connect with the other animals on the planet.
And how did they react with him as a result of that, supposedly?
They just gathered around him.
You see in the garden sometimes, even at our Land of Medicine Buddha in California, we had a St. Francis of Assisi statue with the birds on his shoulders, very, very happy. It's not like they're frightened. So animals, I think they sometimes can sense our intent, whether we're dangerous. And so even being equanimous can have a diffusing effect upon those that might threaten you. So if you can start to experience this in your own meditation, the advantages of being in a state of equanimity, not favoring the friends out of attachment, not penalizing the enemies out of resentment for them, and recognizing the strangers could, in the shortest instant, as soon as you get to know them, become either a friend or an enemy. And therefore, they're definitely also potential recipients of your love and compassion. When you realize that and have an open mind like that, it feels so comfortable. All the fears and grudges, resentments that you may have held, you can see the potentiality in the larger view of them diminishing. And when you get close to death, if you have a near-death experience or you hear someone that's just died, one of my Dharma friends just passed away this last week, and just to think, whatever kinds of attachments that we have oftentimes fade over life, even though at the time they seem so important, so vibrant and exciting, to recognize, and over time we will separate. They may become strangers to us in the future. And that the resentments that we hold, and that cause us unhappiness and cause discord in our relationships and interrelationships with others, that they over time are forgotten, like the little arguments you had in the sandbox, in retrospect becomes so minor. So if you can experience this sense of equanimity in your own meditation, then you can begin to recognize how wonderful it would be if all living beings had this state of equanimity. It would be a precursor to developing real love and compassion. Those individuals would be suitable to be ready to develop bodhicitta, let's say, the altruistic mind to help all sentient beings. Because although it's easy to feel love and compassion for loved ones, it is more difficult to feel love and compassion for enemies. Is it not? So as a preliminary to meditating on love in the stages of developing bodhicitta, which some of you may be familiar with, there's two different methods to develop bodhicitta. You know what they are? The two different methods, Venema? One is called equalizing and exchanging self with others. The 6 causes and 1 result, or the 7 causes and results of bodhicitta. One of the methods revolves around recognizing all living beings as having been your mother, and then deepening that to feeling love for them and compassion. The other method of equalizing and exchanging self with others means first realizing that you're all equal and wanting to be free of suffering and to be endowed with happiness, that we're all equally the same in that, and with a little bit of understanding of emptiness, realizing that you could just as well designate your own identity upon the entirety, the limbs. Right now you identify yourself with the limbs of this body, right? You could just as well identify with the limbs of all living beings. Where there's suffering, you want to have it removed, just like the right hand doesn't feel any resistance to take the thorn out of the left foot. As there's suffering, you want to remove it. As a preliminary to that, it's said that it's very important to meditate on equanimity, for ourselves to meditate on equanimity. Example that's given a little bit like this. At dawn in the desert, when the desert gets cold in the evening, when the sun first rises, it starts to warm all of the desert, the plain of the desert, equally. And as the morning progresses, as the sun rises in the sky, it equally heats all of the desert floor, so that it is equally heated. Like that, if you have a mind of equanimity, like leveling out of the categories of friends, enemies, and strangers, then when you try to develop love and compassion, it's possible to develop it for the enemy. It's not as though there's that subtle, subconscious resistance to developing love and compassion for them. And also, there's not the tendency to be sentimentally preferential toward the friends, think, oh yeah, oh, of course I love my doggy, my porpoise, my panda bear, my sweetie pie. There's certain things that we are partial to that we find attractive, and there's the tendency to think that maybe we're successful in our meditation on love and compassion when you apply it to those individuals, but that's because you are partial toward them at first, and so it's seemingly easy to develop love for them or compassion. But if they were to say something out of anger, harsh words that rupture your relationship, maybe they're no longer recipients of your love and compassion, because you no longer see them as affectionate, as beautiful, and as in the category of friends. Does that make sense? Okay. So this meditation on equanimity, Lama Zopa said, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one of our spiritual director here, our advisor, says that even if you spend your whole life meditating on just trying to have this realization of equanimity, is so worthwhile. I think that's how Lama Zopa would say it, but he'd make it longer. So worthwhile. I'm just teasing him, joking. What that means is putting time in the preliminaries. If you really wanted to have authentic love and compassion for other living beings, if it's built on a non-level foundation, your love for friends and family, in fact, those that are you're affectionate toward, is going to be superficial. It's going to be partially based on your partiality for them. Okay? And your resistance to developing love and compassion will be based on your sense of antagonism toward the camp of enemies. And your ambivalence or disinterest in developing love and compassion for the strangers, there's not enthusiasm, will be thinking that somehow that category is inviolate, is definite. If you recognize, like playing music, as you're playing musical chairs, that all of these categories, the friend can sit in the enemy chair, the enemy can sit in the stranger chair, and so forth. Over time, they're all changing. You meditate on that for some time and embellish that with the thoughts of the exclusive Mahayana meditation on equanimity, that they are suitable, all of them are suitable to be recipients of your love and compassion, both in the sense of relieving suffering, like a doctor. A doctor should not be partial, say in an epidemic, only my friends and family can come for my services, those that I like, and the enemies cannot, the epidemic, I'm not going to treat you. Was it right now Ebola and other things? Or if beggars come around in a time of need, and you only give to those that you find attractive or that are friends, we would see that as a little bit ignoble, no? Do you know what I mean by ignoble? Not noble. Not really, you might think of it as efficient or clever or something like that. But from a bodhisattva point of view, to be able to have real love and compassion and to be able to work for all living beings, you need to have this foundation of equanimity. So we're going to meditate for a couple minutes on equanimity. First, if you have any question or doubt, does it make sense to you? Smart group of people, no questions. Okay, so sit comfortably. I always like to tell myself to relax the body. If you've ever engaged in any kind of relaxation exercises, you can try to recall that. Just relax your muscles. Relax your mind next, which is more difficult to do. Whatever things that might be bothering you about the past or about the future, anticipation of happiness or suffering or worries, or other things that are currently bothering you, just let them go. Right now, you're just going to meditate and attend to these other things with a better state of mind that you'll have after meditation. And then recalling the quiet state of mind we had after the breathing meditation, just dwell in that for a moment. And imagine in front of you 3 chairs, one in the center. Upon that, imagine someone that you categorize right now as either an enemy, or if you don't like the word enemy, if you don't think you have any enemies, someone who pushes your buttons, someone who is irritating to you, someone you don't like to be with, you feel threatened by. They're threatening. Someone you don't like naturally. There's some kind of resistance toward them. On the right, another chair, a little distance away, within which is a friend. Might be your mom or dad or your children, someone you love, you feel close to. If not love, that you feel very friendly toward, friend, that you would really go out of your way to help, generally. On the left of the center chair, another chair within which is someone that you may recognize from the street or the bus or the marketplace, but you don't know them. Or just an anonymous face, someone who's a stranger. If you were to be told that they have sickness or they've had some good fortune, it wouldn't affect you one way or the other, just a stranger to you. Now look at the person in the center, the so-called enemy camp, and think about the reason that they are in this category in your mind. If you trace back, it will probably go back to some event that happened in the past, this lifetime. They said something about you. They did something to you. They criticized you. They hurt you. They deprived you of something. Perhaps you're jealous of them. And once in that camp, your mind began to add more details and more reasons, although the other reasons might be by themselves not enough to put them in the camp of enemy. Recognize how that was an event that took place in the past and can, if you were to hear that person, say at a cocktail party or at a dinner or something, you're on the other side of a potted plant and you hear them saying something nice about you, how that could change. Your whole attitude about them can change. You might think, oh, they actually like me. Or they say, oh, I've always regretted I've hurt so-and-so. I wish we could be friends. Your whole attitude could change. Remember the sandbox that enemies, when you were kids, later become so close that we feel great sadness to be separated from them later. That person who is now the enemy could become the friend this lifetime. It has happened before. I think in previous lives, this individual has been my best friend, has been my mother, my companion, numberless times in the past. There's nothing definite about their current status. I still have to have wisdom to be vigilant, not to let, if the person might be harmful, not to be a patsy or whatever you want to call, but still to recognize that that individual is not always enemy, that they are equally, in over the course of numberless lives, they've equally been friend, enemy, and stranger. Look at the friend. Turn your attention to the chair on the right, within which is the present friend. Although they may be family, companion, dear friend, in past lives, they may have been a predator that ate your body. You know, they were a fox that ate your little chick body. Or they may have been a thief that stole from your house and then killed you. Numberless times in the past, they've been enemy. They're not always friend. They're not always family. So it's unsuitable to help them only out of attachment while disregarding help to others, because others are equally friend. In the future lives, the friend, well, even later this lifetime, they may become a stranger. You lose contact with them. You no longer feel the same ardor, the same depth of love and closeness to them, and you're ambivalent toward them later. They're almost like a stranger. Or maybe they become an enemy this lifetime. Certainly in the future, they could become your enemy. And turn your attention to the stranger. Why are they a stranger? The person on the left, in the left seat. Because you have not yet feelings about them in terms of closeness or distance. In meeting them and talking to them, you may have some impression about them. They may say something that ingratiates themselves to you, that you feel close to. Or so they become a friend. Or they may say something that irritates you. They tell you their political affiliation or something. I know some people, just hearing that suddenly, oh, they're an enemy. They're not the same party I am or whatever. Or they're not the same race I am or whatever. Interesting. So those strangers have been in the past friends and enemies equal number of times. There's not any that have been more friends, more enemies. So think of these chairs then. The center chair is the enemy chair. The chair on your right is the friend chair. And the chair on the far left is the stranger chair. Now the music starts, they get up, they're running around. Music stops, like Another Life or 20 years down the line. They sit down, but they could sit down in different chairs. There's nothing definite about always being in the same category. The friend can sit in the enemy chair, the center, or in the stranger chair. The stranger could now be a friend or an enemy, dearest friend or fearful enemy. The enemy can become our dearest friend or stranger. We lose contact with them. Music starts again. They run around, sit down in different chairs. See if you can get a feeling of that. Now, imagine in front of you all of the people who are in an antagonistic category in your mind, the quote, so-called enemy, unquote. People who push your button, who frighten you. All of them there, very prominent in your mind's eye. Behind you, all of those that you feel close to, you have no fear of, that you feel affection for, your loved ones, your friends, family. And then all around in space, filling the rest of space out to the very edges of infinite space. All living beings as at the moment, we are not cognizant of being friends or enemies to strangers, essentially. Although in the past, each and every one of them have been our mother. Each and every one of them have been our mortal enemy, have eaten our bodies. We've eaten their bodies. We've beaten them, incarcerated them, hated them. Or we've loved them. They've been our closest friends. But right now, we don't recognize them. Using these reasonings we've just talked about, the changeability over one lifetime, the changeability over the course of many lifetimes, see if you can get a sense of the common equanimity that all of these individuals are equally capable of being friend, enemy, and stranger. As though the distinctions of these three camps begins to dissolve. The ones you're so close to now that you want to be so close to, that you love so much. Being in samsara, cyclic existence with contaminated aggregates, their delusions can rise, your delusions can rise, like two marbles rolled across the floor, running parallel for some period of time, can start to diverge. You can become enemies later, strangers, discordant. All living beings, although they may be presently categorized in our limited minds as friends, enemies, and strangers, they're not definitely those. So let those boundaries begin to melt in your mind, to see them as a homogeneous field of living beings, equally friend, enemy, and stranger. Think also of the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. One of the great qualities of equanimity, it's said that if a person were to be on one side of the Buddha, rubbing his body with what is it called? Sandalwood paste. To us, maybe that doesn't sound interesting, but in India, that was supposedly a great, like going to the spa or something, out of loving affection for us, soothing us, embracing us. On the other side, someone cutting the Buddha's body with a knife. The Buddha's mind did not see any difference in those individuals. Both equally objects of compassion, equally objects of love. There was no partiality. So to the omniscient mind, these categories, conventional categories, don't even exist. Friend, enemy, and stranger. All living beings are equally objects of love and compassion. See if using these reasons you can get a feeling of that sense of equanimity. And then if you do, give up the reasoning for a moment and just abide in that single-pointedly, that sense of equanimity. Recognizing this, being cognizant of this, you're not going to be so shocked when the friend leaves you. You're not going to be resistant to the possible reconciliation with those that you are unreconciled with now, whether you call them enemies or people that you'd, have some problem with. You can see the potential They're not always in one of those categories. And you can see the potential in strangers, like Lamieschi just meeting a nurse in the hospital and immediately, when he was near death, immediately asking about the nurse's welfare and how their family is. And a moment before, a stranger, but with that equanimous mind ready to help. Think how the enemies are equally objects or equally fitting to be objects of your compassion and love as the friends. Also the strangers. So it's like leveling the mountainous partitions of our mind like a plane, so that when affection begins to rise, the sun of affection begins to rise slowly, it can arise equally to friends, enemies, and strangers as they're categorized now. And as the warmth of that rises, it can become authentic, not partial, not superficial love for the friends, and a begrudging verbal love for enemies, but not a, not an authentic love for enemies, that it can be authentic. I think this could be my life practice. Overcome counter-transference, to have authentic relationship with, if I'm in the helping professions, my clients, my patients, those that I help, with my friends and family, and especially overcoming our resistance to the enemies. And in conclusion of all our meditations, think whatever good imprints I've left in the mind this morning, particularly from good motivation, listening to the teachings, weighing them in my mind critically, contemplating, reflecting on them, and then finally meditating on them, trying to have some deeper experience. Whatever imprints have been left of virtue in my mind, may they become the cause of my continued spiritual practice throughout the day, the weeks, the years, the lives. May they benefit in two ways. May they become the cause of my real Dharma happiness, my inner contentment and bliss, so the aim of oneself. And may they become, by myself becoming wise, compassionate, and loving, may I be able to lead other sentient beings out of suffering. May I become a authentic human being, as my Jewish friends say, a real mensch, real good person, even this lifetime. I'm sure some of you already are. Due to these merits, may I eventually become enlightened for the sake of all living beings. Thank you very much. So nice to have spent some time with you. Well, hope to see you again Sundays. What's coming up this week? We have any events during the week? We have Discovering Buddhism tomorrow evening, if you haven't come. Introduction to knowing about the fundamentals of Buddhism. You're welcome. On Friday night, there's a class that I've been teaching on the mind and mental factors. Now we're just talking about the virtuous and non-virtuous mental factors, the delusions, which are the most important thing to recognize in your everyday life, you're welcome to come and drop in. Generally not the policy, but I'm asking permission from the, what do you call it, from the Kadampa centers that you can drop in. And I think, is there puja during the week also? There's a, not this week, next Saturday. So hope to see you again sometime. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.